Sarah Chen walked into the Golden Rose nightclub with trembling hands. The music was loud, but not loud enough to drown out her racing heartbeat. She had never been inside such an expensive place before. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and men in expensive suits sat at tables drinking champagne that cost more than her monthly rent. She was here because of her brother Michael. 3 weeks ago, he had borrowed $50,000 from the wrong people. Now those people wanted their money back, plus interest. When Michael couldn't pay, they took him. The message was clear. Bring the money to the Golden Rose or Michael would disappear forever. Sarah had sold everything she owned. Her car, her grandmother's jewelry, even her college textbooks. But she could only raise $30,000. She hoped it would be enough, or at least enough to buy more time. The club was packed with dangerous-looking men. Some had scars on their faces, others had tattoos crawling up their necks. They all seemed to be watching her as she walked deeper into the club. Sarah felt like a mouse walking into a den of cats. She spotted the man she was supposed to meet sitting in a corner booth. Vincent Kozlov had silver hair and cold blue eyes. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than Sarah made in 6 months. 2 large men sat beside him, their arms crossed over their chests. Sarah approached the table, her legs feeling like jelly. She placed a bag on the table and tried to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Kozlov, I have $30,000. I know it's not the full amount, but I can get the rest. I just need more time." Vincent opened the bag and counted the money slowly. His face showed no emotion. When he finished counting, he looked up at Sarah with those freezing blue eyes. "Your brother owed me $50,000 3 weeks ago. Now he owes me $75,000. The price goes up every day he can't pay." Sarah's heart sank. "Please, I'll get you the money. I just need 2 more weeks. I can work extra shifts, maybe take a loan." "No more loans," Vincent interrupted. "No more time. You're $45,000 short." He leaned back in his chair and studied her face. "But maybe we can work something out." The 2 men beside Vincent smirked, and Sarah felt sick to her stomach. She knew what men like this wanted from women like her. She had heard the stories. Girls who went missing or came back broken and empty. Vincent seemed to read her thoughts. "Don't worry, little bird, I'm not interested in that kind of arrangement." He sipped his drink and continued watching her. "Tell me, what do you do for work?" "I'm a dance teacher," Sarah answered, confused by the question. "I teach ballet and modern dance at a studio downtown." Something flickered in Vincent's eyes. "Dance teacher. Interesting." He was quiet for a long moment, then suddenly stood up. "Come with me." Sarah followed him through the club, past tables, full of men who stopped their conversations to stare at her. Vincent led her to a smaller room behind the main club area. This room was quieter with softer lighting and fewer people. "There's someone I want you to meet," Vincent said. He walked over to a table where a young man sat alone, staring into his drink. The man looked up when they approached, and Sarah was surprised by how young he was. He couldn't be much older than her 25 years. "Marcus, this is Sarah," Vincent said to the young man. "Sarah, meet my son Marcus." Marcus Kozlov had his father's blue eyes, but where Vincent's were cold as ice, Marcus's eyes held a sadness that made Sarah's chest tighten. He was handsome in a dangerous way, with dark hair and sharp features. But there was something broken about him, something that made Sarah want to look away and step closer at the same time. "Why are you introducing me to your son?" Sarah asked Vincent, though she kept her eyes on Marcus. "My son has a problem," Vincent explained. 6 months ago, his wife Elena was killed in a car accident. Since then, Marcus has been difficult to manage. He won't eat properly, won't sleep, won't take care of business. He just sits here every night, drinking and remembering." Sarah looked at Marcus again. Now she understood the sadness in his eyes. It was grief, pure and simple, the kind of grief that could destroy a person if they let it. "I still don't understand what this has to do with me," Sarah said. Vincent smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Elena was a dancer, ballet just like you teach. Marcus loved to watch her dance. It was the only thing that made him happy." He paused and looked between Sarah and his son. "I think you could help him remember how to live again." Sarah's blood ran cold. You want me to dance for your son to pay off my brother's debt? Not just dance, Vincent corrected. Elena used to go to social events with Marcus. Charity galas, business dinners, family gatherings. She was his partner in every way. I need someone who can fill that role, at least temporarily. Marcus finally spoke, his voice rough from alcohol and disuse. I don't want a replacement for Elena. You don't have a choice, Vincent snapped at his son. Then he turned back to Sarah. Here's my offer. Spend 6 months as Marcus's companion. Attend events with him, help him get back to normal life. Do this and your brother's debt disappears completely. Sarah's mind raced. 6 months with a grieving Mafia boss's son. It sounded like a nightmare. But the alternative was worse. Michael would die, and she would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. And if I say no? She asked. Vincent's smile disappeared entirely. Then we go back to the original arrangement. $75,000 due tomorrow. And the price goes up every day after that. Sarah looked at Marcus again. He was watching her now, his blue eyes studying her face. There was something almost desperate in his gaze, like a drowning man reaching for a rope. Despite everything, Sarah felt sorry for him. She knew what it was like to lose someone you loved. If I agree, Sarah said slowly, I want to see my brother first. I want proof that he's alive and safe. Vincent nodded. Fair enough. Marcus will take you to see him tomorrow. Consider it your first official duty. Sarah took a deep breath and made the decision that would change everything. All right, I'll do it. 6 months. Vincent's cold smile returned. Excellent, welcome to the family, Sarah Chen. The next morning, Sarah woke up in her small apartment wondering if the previous night had been a terrible dream. But the business card on her nightstand proved it was real. Marcus Kozlov would pick her up at noon to see Michael. Sarah spent the morning trying to figure out what to wear to meet a Mafia boss's son. She settled on a simple black dress and ballet flats. At exactly 12 o'clock, there was a knock on her door. Marcus stood in her hallway looking completely different than he had the night before. He had shaved and his hair was neat. He wore dark jeans and a white button-down shirt that made his blue eyes even more striking. But the sadness was still there, hiding behind his polite smile. Ready? He asked, his voice much clearer than it had been at the club. They drove through the city in a black BMW that probably cost more than Sarah's apartment. Marcus didn't talk much during the drive, but Sarah could feel him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. Where are we going? Sarah finally asked. My father owns a warehouse on the south side, Marcus replied. Your brother is being kept there. He's safe, he added quickly when he saw Sarah's expression. My father doesn't hurt people unless they give him a reason. The warehouse was huge and surrounded by a tall fence. Marcus parked near a side entrance and led Sarah inside. The building was mostly empty except for some offices in the back. They walked down a long hallway until Marcus stopped at a door and knocked. Come in, came a voice from inside. Sarah's heart jumped when she saw Michael sitting at a small table, playing cards with 2 men. He looked tired but unhurt. When he saw her, he jumped up and pulled her into a hug. Sarah, what are you doing here? How did you find me? Sarah held her brother tight, relief flooding through her. I made a deal, she said quietly. You're going to be okay. Michael pulled back and looked at Marcus, who was standing silently by the door. Who's this? Someone who's going to help us, Sarah said. She couldn't explain the whole situation with Michael's guards listening. I'll tell you everything later. They only had a few minutes to talk before Marcus said they had to go. Sarah hugged Michael again and promised she would see him soon. On the drive back, Marcus was quiet again until Sarah couldn't stand it anymore. Why did you agree to this? She asked. Your father said you didn't want a replacement for your wife. Marcus was silent for so long that Sarah thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he spoke without taking his eyes off the road. Because I don't want to be who I've become, he said. 6 months ago, I was a different person. I had plans, dreams, a future. Now I can barely get out of bed in the morning. He glanced at her briefly. Maybe having someone around who knew Elena's world will help me remember who I used to be. You said Elena was a dancer? Marcus nodded. She was beautiful when she danced. It was like watching magic. His voice got softer. We met at a charity gala. She was performing with the city ballet company. I watched her dance and knew I had to meet her. Sarah could hear the love in his voice when he talked about Elena. It made her chest tight with sympathy and something else she didn't want to name. What was she like? Sarah asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since she'd met him. It transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less dangerous. She was kind, really kind, not just polite. She volunteered at the children's hospital, teaching dance to sick kids. She made me want to be better than I was. The smile faded. She didn't know about my family's business when we met. By the time she found out, she was already in love with me. How did she handle learning the truth? She hated it, Marcus said honestly. But she loved me more than she hated what my family did. She made me promise that when my father retired, I would take the business in a different direction. Legal direction. They pulled up in front of Sarah's apartment building. Marcus turned off the engine but didn't get out. I need to ask you something, he said. Tomorrow night there's a business dinner. Important people will be there. I need you to come with me. Sarah's stomach dropped. What kind of business dinner? The legal kind, mostly. My father has been trying to move into legitimate businesses, real estate, restaurants, import companies, but some of his old associates will be there too. Marcus looked at her seriously. I won't lie to you, Sarah. Being seen with me puts you in danger. There are people who would hurt you to get to my family. Sarah thought about Michael, still trapped in that warehouse. She thought about the debt that would follow her for the rest of her life if she backed out now. What do I need to do? Just be yourself. Be my date for the evening. Let people see that I'm functioning again. Marcus hesitated. And maybe, if you're comfortable with it, we could dance. Elena and I always danced at these events. People will expect it. Sarah nodded slowly. I can do that. Marcus looked relieved. Thank you. I'll pick you up at 7. Dress formal. It's at the Riverside Hotel. After Marcus left, Sarah called her best friend Jenny to explain that she would be away for a while. She couldn't tell Jenny the truth, so she made up a story about a special teaching opportunity out of state. That evening, Sarah went shopping for a formal dress with money Marcus had given her. She found a navy blue gown that was elegant but not too revealing. As she looked at herself in the dressing room mirror, she wondered what she was getting herself into. The next night, Marcus arrived exactly on time wearing a black tuxedo that made him look like he belonged in a magazine. Sarah had spent 2 hours getting ready, and from the way Marcus's eyes widened when he saw her, the effort had been worth it. You look beautiful, he said softly. The Riverside Hotel was the most expensive place in the city. Sarah had never been inside before, but she tried to act like she belonged there. Marcus kept his hand on the small of her back as they walked through the lobby, and Sarah was surprised by how safe it made her feel. The dinner was being held in a private ballroom. There were about 50 people there, all dressed in expensive clothes and jewelry that probably cost more than Sarah made in a year. Marcus introduced her to person after person, and Sarah tried to remember all their names. Sarah is a dance teacher, Marcus would say, and people would nod politely and ask questions about her work. Some of them seemed genuinely interested, while others clearly didn't think she belonged there. During dinner, Sarah sat next to Marcus at a table with several other couples. The conversation was mostly about business deals and politics. Sarah tried to follow along, but it was clear that some of the business being discussed wasn't entirely legal. After dinner, a small orchestra began playing and couples started moving to the dance floor. Sarah watched Marcus's face grow tense as other couples began to dance. We don't have to, Sarah said quietly. Marcus looked at her, and she saw him struggling with something internal. Finally, he stood and offered her his hand. Elena would want me to dance again, he said. They walked onto the dance floor together, and Sarah was surprised by how naturally Marcus moved. He was a good dancer, smooth and confident. As they moved together to the music, Sarah forgot about the dangerous people around them and the complicated situation she was in. For a few minutes, it was just 2 people dancing. But then Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. At a table near the edge of the dance floor, a man in a gray suit was watching them with intense interest. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place where she had seen him before. Marcus noticed her distraction and followed her gaze. When he saw the man watching them, his whole body went rigid. We need to leave, he said quietly in her ear. Now. Marcus guided Sarah off the dance floor, trying to look casual while moving as quickly as possible. But before they could reach the exit, the man in the gray suit stepped in front of them. Marcus Kozlov, the man said with a thick Russian accent. "You look much better than the last time I saw you." Sarah could feel the tension radiating from Marcus as he forced a smile. "Dmitri, I didn't know you were in town." Dmitri Volkov was tall and thin with pale eyes that reminded Sarah of a snake. When he smiled, she could see gold teeth glinting in his mouth. Everything about him made her want to run. "Your father didn't tell you I was coming?" Dmitri asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "We have business to discuss, the kind of business that can't wait." "Not tonight," Marcus said firmly. "We were just leaving." Dmitri's eyes moved to Sarah, looking her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "And who is this lovely creature?" "She's not Elena." Sarah saw Marcus's hands clench into fists. "This is Sarah Chen, she's with me." "Yes, I can see that," Dmitri said with an unpleasant laugh. "Tell me, Miss Chen, do you know what happened to the last woman who was with Marcus Kozlov?" Marcus stepped closer to Dmitri, his voice low and dangerous. "Careful, Dmitri." But Dmitri wasn't finished. He leaned toward Sarah with that terrible smile. "She died in a very unfortunate car accident. Brakes failed on a mountain road. Very tragic." He paused for effect. Of course, brakes don't usually fail on their own. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Was Dmitri saying that Elena's death wasn't an accident? She looked at Marcus and saw something that terrified her. He didn't look surprised by what Dmitri had said. "We're leaving," Marcus said, taking Sarah's arm. "Of course you are," Dmitri called after them. "But remember, Marcus, some conversations can't be avoided forever." Marcus practically dragged Sarah out of the hotel and into his car. His hands were shaking as he started the engine, and Sarah could see sweat on his forehead despite the cool night air. "Drive," Sarah said quietly. "Just drive." They drove in silence for 20 minutes before Marcus finally pulled into an empty parking lot and turned off the engine. He sat with his hands gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. "Elena's death wasn't an accident," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke without looking at her. "My father has enemies, people who have been trying to take over his territory for years. Dmitri Volkov is one of them." Marcus's voice was hollow. 6 months ago, my father and Dmitri were negotiating a deal. It fell through and things got ugly. Sarah waited for him to continue. Dmitri needed to send a message. He needed to show my father that no one in our family was safe. Marcus finally turned to look at Sarah, and she saw tears in his eyes. "So he had Elena killed. Made it look like an accident." Sarah's heart broke for him. "Why didn't your father retaliate?" "Because he couldn't prove it was Dmitri. And because..." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Because I fell apart after Elena died. I couldn't function, couldn't think straight. My father needed me to help run the business, but I was useless." Now Sarah understood why Vincent Kozlov had been so interested in finding someone to help his son. It wasn't just about Marcus's emotional well-being. It was about business. A grieving, unstable son was a liability in their dangerous world. "What does Dmitri want now?" Sarah asked. "To finish what he started 6 months ago. With me back to normal, my father is stronger." "Dmitri doesn't want that." Marcus looked at Sarah with something like fear in his eyes. "Being seen with me tonight put you on his radar." "I'm sorry, Sarah, I should have warned you better." Sarah thought about Michael still locked in that warehouse. She thought about the debt that would destroy her life if she walked away now. Most of all, she thought about the broken man sitting next to her, who had lost the woman he loved to a monster's revenge. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus started the car again. "Now I take you home, and tomorrow I tell my father you've changed your mind about our arrangement. It's too dangerous for you to be involved in this." "What about my brother?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I'll talk to my father. Maybe we can work something else out." They drove back toward Sarah's apartment, but as they turned onto her street, Marcus suddenly hit the brakes. "Get down," he said sharply. Sarah ducked down in her seat just as Marcus threw the car in reverse and sped backward down the street. Through the passenger window, she could see 2 black SUVs parked outside her apartment building. "Dimitri's men," Marcus explained grimly. "They work fast. Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe. I need to call my father." Marcus drove to a small motel on the outskirts of town. He paid for a room with cash and led Sarah inside. The room was clean but basic. 1 bed, a small table, and a TV that looked like it was from the 1990s. Marcus immediately pulled out his phone and dialed. Sarah could only hear his side of the conversation, but it was clear that Vincent Kozlov was not happy about the evening's events. "Yes, sir, I understand," Marcus said, "but she's not safe at her apartment now. No, I don't think she should go back there." "Yes, sir." He hung up and turned to Sarah. "My father wants to meet with you tomorrow. He's moving your brother to a safer location tonight." Sarah sat down heavily on the bed. "This is insane. Yesterday I was a dance teacher worried about paying my rent. Now I'm hiding from Russian gangsters in a motel room." Marcus sat down across from her at the small table. "I know this isn't what you signed up for. If you want out, I'll find a way to protect you." Sarah looked at him sitting there in his expensive tuxedo in this cheap motel room. He looked as out of place as she felt. But there was something else. Despite everything that had happened, she found herself caring about what happened to him. "Why didn't you tell me about Elena being murdered?" she asked. Marcus met her eyes. "Because I was afraid you'd run, and because—" he hesitated. "Because I haven't been able to say it out loud to anyone. Not even my father. Saying it makes it real." Sarah understood that feeling. Sometimes the worst things in life became bearable only as long as you didn't put them into words. "I'm not running," she said quietly. Marcus looked surprised. "Sarah, you don't understand how dangerous this is. Dmitri won't hesitate to kill you if he thinks it will hurt my family." "I understand perfectly," Sarah said. "But I made a deal to save my brother. And besides—" She paused, not sure if she should say what she was thinking. "You need help, real help. And I think I can give it to you." Marcus studied her face. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a deep breath. "You've been living like a ghost for 6 months. You're not sleeping, you're drinking too much, and you're afraid to care about anything because you might lose it again." She leaned forward. "But hiding from life isn't going to bring Elena back. And it's not going to protect anyone you might care about in the future." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Sarah challenged. "I lost my parents in a car crash when I was 19. Michael and I had no other family. For 2 years I was so afraid of losing him too that I barely let him out of my sight. I was protecting him so hard that I was suffocating us both." Marcus was quiet, listening. "Elena wouldn't want you to stop living because she's gone," Sarah continued. "And she definitely wouldn't want her death to make you weak enough for her killer to destroy your family." Marcus stood up abruptly and walked to the window. He stood there for a long time looking out at the dark parking lot. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "we go see my father. We figure out how to keep you and your brother safe. And then—" He turned back to Sarah. "Then we make Dmitri Volkov pay for what he did." Sarah felt a chill at the coldness in Marcus's voice. For the first time, she saw the dangerous man hidden beneath his grief. She realized she might be helping to wake up something that had been sleeping for 6 months. Something that Dmitri Volkov was going to regret disturbing. Sarah barely slept that night. Every car that passed the motel made her jump, thinking it might be Dmitri's men. Marcus had taken the chair by the window, and she could see him watching the parking lot even when he thought she was asleep. In the morning, Marcus drove them to a different location than before. A large house in an expensive neighborhood surrounded by high walls and security cameras. Vincent Kozlov was waiting for them in his study, a room filled with dark wood furniture and books that looked like they had never been read. "Sit," Vincent said to Sarah without looking up from the papers on his desk. Sarah sat in one of the leather chairs across from Vincent's desk. Marcus remained standing behind her, which somehow made her feel safer. Vincent finally looked up at her with those cold blue eyes. "Dmitri Volkov is a problem that I should have dealt with months ago. How he's made this personal by threatening you." "I can handle myself," Sarah said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Vincent almost smiled. "I'm sure you think you can, but Dmitri has been killing people longer than you've been alive." He leaned back in his chair. "However, the situation has given me an idea." Marcus moved closer to his father's desk. "What kind of idea?" "Dmitri expects me to hide you away, Marcus. He expects me to protect you the way I failed to protect Elena." Vincent's voice was cold and calculating. "Instead, we're going to do the opposite." Sarah didn't like the sound of this. "What does that mean?" Vincent stood and walked to the window overlooking his garden. "There's going to be a charity auction next weekend at the Metropolitan Museum. Very public, very high profile. All the important families will be there, including Dmitri's people." "You want us to go?" Marcus asked, disbelief in his voice. I want you to make a grand entrance, Vincent said. I want everyone to see that my son is back to his old self. Strong, confident, unafraid. He turned back to them. And I want them to see that he's moved on from his grief. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. You want us to pretend that Marcus has gotten over Elena's death? Vincent's eyes narrowed. I want my enemies to believe that their psychological warfare has failed. That killing Elena didn't break my son like they hoped. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Sarah could see him struggling with the idea of appearing publicly with another woman so soon after Elena's death. What's the real plan? Marcus finally asked. Vincent smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. The real plan is to give Dmitri enough confidence to make a mistake. If he thinks you're emotionally stable and back in the business, he'll feel pressured to act quickly. Desperate men make errors. Sarah was beginning to understand. You're using us as bait. Exactly, Vincent said. Dmitri will try to eliminate the threat he thinks you represent to his plans. When he does, we'll be ready for him. Marcus shook his head. This is too dangerous for Sarah. She's not trained for this kind of thing. Which is exactly why it will work, Vincent replied. Dmitri won't see her as a threat. He'll underestimate her just like everyone else will. Sarah thought about this for a moment. The plan was terrifying, but it also made sense. If they could trick Dmitri into revealing himself, they might be able to end the threat once and for all. What about my brother? Sarah asked. Vincent nodded to Marcus, who pulled out his phone and made a call. A few minutes later, he handed the phone to Sarah. Sarah? Michael's voice came through clearly. Are you okay? These guys moved me to some kind of safe house last night. I'm fine, Sarah said, relief flooding through her. Are they treating you well? Yeah, actually. Better than I deserve considering the trouble I caused. Michael paused. Sarah, what's really going on? Who are these people? Sarah looked at Vincent and Marcus. I'll explain everything soon. Just stay safe, okay? After she hung up, Vincent outlined the rest of the plan. Sarah and Marcus would attend the auction as a couple. They would be visible, social, and appear completely unworried about any threats. Vincent's security team would be watching from a distance, ready to act when Dmitri made his move. There's one more thing, Vincent said. You'll need to sell the performance completely. Everyone there knows how much Marcus loved Elena. If they don't believe he's truly moved on, the plan won't work. Sarah understood what he was saying. She and Marcus would have to act like a real couple. Touching, dancing, looking at each other like they were in love. The thought made her stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Over the next few days, Sarah stayed at the Kozlov house while security swept her apartment and made sure it was safe. She spent time with Marcus, learning about his world and helping him prepare for the public performance they would have to give. Marcus told her stories about Elena, and Sarah found herself genuinely liking the woman she had never met. Elena sounded kind, funny, and completely devoted to Marcus. It made Sarah's role feel even more complicated. She had this laugh, Marcus said one evening as they sat in the garden. It was so loud and unexpected. The first time I heard it, I was giving a speech at a business dinner. Very serious topic, and suddenly I heard this ridiculous giggle from the back of the room. Sarah smiled. She was laughing at your speech? She was laughing at something her friend had whispered to her, but I thought she was laughing at me. I was so offended that I sought her out after my speech to demand an apology. And? Marcus's eyes got that faraway look they always did when he talked about Elena. And she laughed even harder when I told her why I was upset. But then she apologized so sweetly that I forgot why I had been angry. Sarah felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy, which confused her. She barely knew Marcus, and he was clearly still in love with his dead wife. The night before the auction, Marcus found Sarah in the library, practicing her posture and movement. Vincent had insisted she looked like she belonged in high society, so she was working on walking and sitting like the wealthy women she had observed. You don't have to change who you are, Marcus said from the doorway. Sarah turned around, startled. Your father said I needed to fit in. Marcus walked into the room and sat down across from her. My father says a lot of things. But the reason this plan might work is because you're not like the women in our world. You're real. What does that mean? Marcus thought for a moment. The women at these events, they're all playing roles. Trophy wives, social climbers, business partners. But you're just yourself. It's refreshing. Sarah felt her cheeks get warm. I'm terrified I'll say the wrong thing and blow the whole plan. You won't, Marcus said with certainty. Just be Sarah the dance teacher who cares about her brother. and isn't afraid to stand up to dangerous men. That's exactly who I need you to be." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Sarah asked the question that had been bothering her. "Are you okay with this? Pretending to have moved on from Elena?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah thought she had overstepped. Finally, he spoke. "Elena used to say that love wasn't about holding on to someone forever. It was about loving them completely while you had them." He looked at Sarah. "She wouldn't want me to spend the rest of my life mourning her, and she definitely wouldn't want her death to be the weapon that destroys my family." Sarah nodded, understanding. Marcus stood up to leave, but then turned back. "Sarah, tomorrow night when we're pretending to be a couple, it won't all be pretending, at least not for me." He left the room before Sarah could respond, leaving her alone with a racing heart and 1,000 questions she didn't know how to answer. The Metropolitan Museum was transformed for the charity auction. Red carpet lined the entrance, and photographers captured every arriving guest. Sarah had never seen so much wealth and power in one place. She wore a stunning red dress that Vincent had chosen for her. Elegant but eye-catching, expensive but not flashy. Marcus looked incredible in his black tuxedo, and when he offered her his arm at the entrance, Sarah felt like they were walking into a movie. The photographers immediately focused on them. Sarah could hear whispers from the crowd as they recognized Marcus. She caught fragments of conversations. "First time out since Elena died. Who is the woman? Looks like he's finally moving on." Inside the museum, the main hall had been converted into an auction space with a stage at one end and tables throughout. Priceless artwork hung on the walls, and waiters moved through the crowd serving champagne and appetizers that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget. Marcus guided her through the room, introducing her to person after person. Sarah tried to remember all the names and faces, knowing that some of these people were likely allies, while others might be enemies. "Sarah Chen," Marcus would say. "She's a dance instructor. We met at a gallery opening last month." The story was simple but believable. Sarah found herself settling into the role, smiling and making small talk about art and culture. She was surprised by how naturally the conversations flowed. About an hour into the event, Sarah spotted Dmitry Volkov across the room. He was standing with 3 other men, all of them watching Marcus and Sarah with obvious interest. When Dmitry caught her looking, he raised his champagne glass in a mock toast. "He's here," Sarah whispered to Marcus. Marcus followed her gaze and nodded. "Good. Let's give him something to see." The auction began shortly after that, with items ranging from rare paintings to luxury vacations. Sarah was amazed by how casually people bid tens of thousands of dollars on things they didn't really need. When a weekend in Paris came up for auction, Marcus suddenly raised his hand. 50,000, he called out. The auctioneer smiled. 50,000 from Mr. Kozlov. Do I hear 60? Another bidder raised the price to 60,000. Marcus immediately countered with 75,000. What are you doing? Sarah whispered. Making a statement, Marcus replied quietly. Dmitry thinks I'm broken and desperate. A man planning a romantic weekend in Paris doesn't sound very broken. Marcus won the auction at $90,000. As the crowd applauded, he turned to Sarah and kissed her cheek. Congratulations on our trip to Paris, he said loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Sarah felt her face flush, but she smiled and played along. I can't wait. After the auction, the tables were cleared away and a jazz band began playing. Couples moved onto the dance floor and Sarah knew what was expected. Marcus offered her his hand. Shall we? They walked onto the dance floor together, and Sarah was again struck by what a good dancer Marcus was. He led her confidently through a slow waltz, and Sarah found herself forgetting about their audience and just enjoying the music. You're a natural at this, Marcus said softly. At dancing. At being someone I could fall in love with, he replied, so quietly that only she could hear. Sarah's breath caught. She looked up into his blue eyes and saw something there that made her heart race. This was supposed to be pretending, but it felt very real. The song ended, but instead of leaving the dance floor, Marcus kept hold of her hand as the band started a tango. The music was sultry and dramatic, and Marcus pulled Sarah closer than they had danced before. As they moved together, Sarah became aware that the entire room was watching them. Conversations had stopped, and people were openly staring at the Mafia prince dancing with his mysterious new girlfriend. Everyone's looking, Sarah whispered. Let them look, Marcus replied, spinning her dramatically. Let them see that I'm alive again. The tango ended with Marcus dipping Sarah low, their faces inches apart. For a moment Sarah thought he might actually kiss her. Instead, he pulled her back up and they walked off the dance floor to thunderous applause. But as they moved toward their table, Sarah noticed that Dmitri was no longer where he had been standing. She looked around the room but couldn't spot him anywhere. Marcus, she started to say, but he had noticed too. I see, he said grimly, or rather I don't see. They made it back to their table, but Marcus was tense now, his eyes constantly scanning the room. Sarah tried to act normal, but her heart was pounding. Maybe he just left, she suggested. Dmitri doesn't leave without getting what he came for, Marcus replied. A waiter approached their table with a bottle of champagne. Compliments of a gentleman who wishes to remain anonymous, he said, setting the bottle down. Marcus grabbed the waiter's arm. What gentleman? Describe him. The waiter looked nervous. Tall, thin gray suit? He said to tell you that he hopes you enjoy your evening. Marcus's face went white. We need to leave. Now. But as they stood to go, all the lights in the museum suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, casting everything in an eerie red glow. People began murmuring and moving around in confusion. Stay close to me, Marcus said, putting his arm around Sarah protectively. Museum security was trying to calm the crowd and figure out what had caused the power failure. But Sarah could see several men in dark suits moving through the confusion with obvious purpose. They weren't museum security. Marcus spotted them too. This way, he said, guiding Sarah toward a side exit. But before they could reach it, Dmitri Volkov stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. He was no longer alone. 3 large men flanked him, all of them with their hands inside their jackets. Leaving so soon? Dmitri asked with that unpleasant smile. But the evening's entertainment is just beginning. Marcus stepped in front of Sarah. Whatever you want, Dmitri, it's between you and me. Leave her out of it. Oh, but she's the whole point, Dmitri replied. You see, Marcus, I realized something watching you dance tonight. You weren't just pretending to have moved on from Elena. You actually have moved on. You're falling for this little dance teacher. Sarah felt Marcus tense beside her. Which means, Dmitri continued, that killing her will hurt you just as much as killing Elena did. Maybe more, because this time you'll know it's coming. One of Dmitri's men started to move toward them, but suddenly the museum's main lights came back on. In the sudden brightness, Sarah could see Vincent Kozlov's security team positioned throughout the room. Dmitri looked around and realized he was surrounded. His confident smile faltered. Did you really think I would let you attend this event without protection? Vincent's voice came from behind Dmitri as he approached with his own bodyguards. Vincent, Dmitri said, trying to regain his composure. How nice to see you. We were just having a friendly conversation with your son. I heard every word, Vincent replied coldly, including your confession to murdering Elena. Sarah realized that Vincent must have been listening through some kind of surveillance device. Everything Dmitri had just said had been recorded. Dmitri's eyes darted around the room looking for an escape route. But Vincent's men had every exit covered. You have 2 choices, Vincent told Dmitri. You can come with me now and we can discuss this privately. Or I can let the authorities deal with Elena's murder. Dmitri looked at Marcus and Sarah one last time, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over. Yes, Vincent said quietly. It is. Vincent's men moved in and escorted Dmitri and his crew out of the museum. The other guests, unaware of what had just transpired, continued with their evening as if nothing had happened. Sarah found herself shaking as the adrenaline wore off. Marcus put his arms around her and she realized that they were both trembling. It's over, Marcus whispered into her hair. It's finally over. But even as Sarah allowed herself to feel relief, she knew that something else was just beginning. The way Marcus was holding her, the way her heart was racing whenever he looked at her. This was no longer just about saving her brother or fulfilling a contract. This was real, and it was terrifying in a completely different way. 3 weeks after the museum incident, Sarah was finally able to return to her normal life. Michael was safe, the debt was cleared, and Dmitri Volkov was no longer a threat. Vincent had made sure of that through methods Sarah preferred not to think about too deeply. But normal felt different now. Sarah went back to teaching dance classes, but her small studio felt cramped after the grand ballroom she had visited with Marcus. Her students were sweet, but their problems seemed small compared to life-and-death situations she had faced. Most confusing of all, she missed Marcus terribly. She had expected to feel relieved when their arrangement ended. Instead, she felt empty. She caught herself looking for his car every time she left her apartment. She saved newspaper articles about charity events, wondering if he had attended them and who he might have gone with. Sarah tried to convince herself that what she was feeling was just the aftermath of an intense experience. Stockholm Syndrome, maybe, or just the natural letdown after so much excitement. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She was in love with Marcus Kozlov, and she had no idea what to do about it. Marcus, for his part, seemed to be moving on just fine. Sarah occasionally saw photos of him in society magazines, attending events with various beautiful women. He looked happy and healthy, like a man who had successfully put his grief behind him. One evening, about a month after everything ended, Sarah was leaving the studio after her last class when she found Marcus waiting by her car. Her heart jumped at the sight of him, looking handsome and a little nervous in his expensive suit. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. They stood there for a moment in awkward silence before Marcus spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said that night in the motel room. About Elena not wanting me to stop living." Sarah waited for him to continue. "The thing is, I did stop living after she died. For 6 months I was just going through the motions, waiting for something to make sense again." Marcus stepped closer to her. "And then I met you." Sarah's heart was racing now. "Marcus, I know our whole relationship started as a business arrangement. I know you agreed to help me because you had to, not because you wanted to." Marcus looked down at his hands, then back up at her. "But somewhere along the way, it became real for me. You became real for me." Sarah wanted to tell him that it had become real for her too, but she was afraid. Their worlds were too different. She was a dance teacher from a middle-class family, and he was the heir to a criminal empire. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I'm ready to try living again. Really living, not just surviving. And I want to try it with you." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus continued. "I know you're scared. I know my world is dangerous and complicated, but I've been thinking about what my life could look like if I made different choices." He paused. "My father is getting older. In a few years, I'll inherit his business, but I don't have to inherit all of it." "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled out a folder from his car and handed it to Sarah. "These are business plans I've been working on. Legal businesses, real estate development, restaurants, import companies. It would take time to transition completely, but it's possible." Sarah looked through the papers. They were detailed and thorough, clearly the work of someone who had been thinking seriously about changing his life. "You would do this?" she asked. "Elena wanted me to go legitimate when I took over from my father. I owed her that much even before I met you." Marcus stepped closer. "But now I have another reason to want a different kind of life." Sarah felt tears building in her eyes. "Marcus, I love you, Sarah," he said quietly. "I know it's complicated and crazy and maybe too soon, but I love the way you stood up to my father when you were terrified. I love the way you made me want to be better than I was. I love watching you dance and listening to you talk about your students and the way you worry about your brother even when he drives you crazy." A tear rolled down Sarah's cheek. "I love you too." Marcus's face lit up with relief and joy. "Really?" Instead of answering with words, Sarah dropped the folder and kissed him. It was their first real kiss, not performed for an audience or as part of a plan. It was just two people who had found each other in the middle of chaos and decided to hold on. When they finally broke apart, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked. Marcus smiled. "Now we figure it out as we go. We take it slow, we build something real together." He paused. "And we use that trip to Paris I won at the auction." Sarah laughed. "You still have that?" I've been saving it for when I found the right person to go with. Over the next few months, Sarah and Marcus built a relationship that was nothing like the intense, dangerous situation where it had started. They went on normal dates, dinners, movies, walks in the park. Marcus met Michael properly and won him over by offering him a job at one of his legitimate businesses. Sarah slowly got to know the real Marcus, not the grieving widower or the Mafia prince, but just a man who was trying to build a better life. It wasn't always easy. There were still people in Marcus's world who didn't approve of his relationship with an outsider. There were nights when Sarah worried about his safety, and days when Marcus struggled with guilt over moving on from Elena. But they worked through it together. Marcus introduced Sarah to Elena's grave, and Sarah left flowers and told Elena's memory that she would take good care of the man Elena had loved. It felt important to have that connection to the woman who had shaped Marcus into someone worth loving. A year later, Marcus proposed to Sarah in the same ballroom where they had first danced together. By then, he had successfully transitioned most of his business interests to legal enterprises. Vincent, surprisingly, had supported the changes, saying he was ready to enjoy retirement without worrying about law enforcement. Sarah said yes, of course. She had learned that love was worth fighting for, even when it came wrapped up in danger and complications. Their wedding was held in the garden of the Kozlov house, with both sides of their very different families in attendance. Michael walked Sarah down the aisle, and Vincent gave a toast about how sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected circumstances. As Sarah and Marcus shared their first dance as husband and wife, she remembered that night at the museum, when he had whispered that he was falling for someone who wasn't pretending to be anything but herself. She had kept that promise. Through everything that had happened, she had remained Sarah the dance teacher who cared about her family and wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. And somehow, that had been exactly what Marcus needed. The music played, and they danced together surrounded by the people they loved, no longer performing for an audience or following someone else's plan. They were just two people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something beautiful together. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the future looked full of hope instead of fear.